Go live. Preparing to stream. For those that just joined up, we will be taking questions too along the way as much as you want. Just make sure that you're sending it to all panelists and attendees. For those that just joined up, we will be taking questions too along the way. All right, we're apparently live because now I'm talking back to myself.
Yeah, but you've muted the audio, so we're all set.
Yeah. All right, so there we go. Hi everyone, I'm Mike Bielaczyc from Eridani, makers of elf ears and costumes. I'm also an artist with the studio, and I'm the creator of Sagaborn role-playing game, a very indie gaming system that both Ethan and I play. And you are?
And I'm Ethan Siegel. I'm a theoretical astrophysicist who writes a blog, Starts With a Bang. I've authored a couple of books, Beyond the Galaxy and Technology. And today I'm just here as an RPG gamer talking about introducing players for the first time to playing a role-playing game, and I lead a role-playing game. It's the first one I've led in some 20 years, using Mike's system Sagaborn, which I absolutely love, particularly for new players.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I mean, that's, I like simple rules. Back when we first started this, when I talked, the first edition was really started, I don't even remember how many years ago, out at a bar. Remember those days when we could go out to a bar with me and Brian Cooksey, and we're just like, I knew I had an idea of what I wanted, and Brian really helped solidify in that first meeting. He was like, less skills, make it easy, make people look up things less. And all that made it, when you only have 7 skills, it's a lot easier to tell a new player, like, oh, like this is the skill that you need to use, and sometimes it takes, I don't know if you've run into this with Sagaborn, like someone's like, well, I need to sneak, what do I use? Thievery. Oh, I need to search for traps, thievery. And they're like, oh, do I use thievery for everything? It's like, no. And I'm very easygoing. If you can make an argument on why you'd use a skill other than what I think you would use, and you make a good argument for it, I roll with it,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I always look at it as, what does a player want to accomplish? And the way they go about trying to accomplish a task is going to inform, like, just how do we do it? Like, it's my job as the GM to worry about the gaming mechanics. It's only the player's job to figure out what they want to try to do and how they want to do it. So it's interesting, in your campaigns, people use thievery a lot. In mine, they use awareness a lot. I think because I have players who, like, they want to look around, they want to assess, they want to know what's going on. They're cautious before jumping into a thing. And so that means they use their awareness skills a lot, and they use their survival skills a lot. But that's it, is there are only a handful of skills. And I like that, because people who do look around a lot and look for an opening and investigate things and try and suss things out from a distance, that is using a very different skill set than trying to sneak up behind something and take something without someone noticing, or to disable a trap or set a trap. And that's also very different from the traditional hack and slash, which I've really enjoyed having the the barbarian or warrior characters in my campaign too, because a lot of people will be careful planning, and then, like, the barbarian just gets impatient. And this is like a real life thing too, or, like, when we're around with our friends, it's like, okay, like, we're trying to do, oh my God, Kara, what are you doing? Like, no, oh no, let's go bail her out.
I think you're describing my life with Paul.
Oh yeah, you've I understand you've saved him from a number of hairy situations that you would have preferred not to have gotten into in the first place.
Yeah, always a fun story. So I think one of the things that we've said a couple times, the main rule for all of it is to have fun. And so the GM's role in those first games of people playing is to make sure that they're having fun and not stressed out, because there's a lot to take in when you hand someone a sheet and they're like, this sheet is a whole person, and And it's always the trick to seeing, to getting to that moment where someone moves beyond the stress of playing a new game to where like they get the mental muscle memory of like, this is what the character is, this is what they're going to do in this situation. And I think one of the hard things for new players, they don't realize that when you first start playing with a group, it takes a while to make those connections. I mean, you know, when we're playing the Starborn game, you guys are all you guys all role play a lot, but you've never role played together. And that first session was really trying to figure out, like, it's like everyone was like poking and prodding to see how am I going to fit in this group at this table. Even with our pre-planning of characters, you guys were still like, you know, when you get to at the table, it's like, how's this all going to work? And a new player has that on top of being stressed of like, oh my God, this is a whole giant page of numbers, you know?
Right, right. And I think one of the most important things that I've done with new players, and I wouldn't have thought to do this if I hadn't talked to you before about it, and you brought it up, is this idea of having a zero session. It's especially useful for new players. So if you've never heard the term zero session before, this is where we're going to get together and we are not going to game today. We are not going to role play. What we're going to do is we're going to help you create your character, or we're going to give you a pre-made character and tell you, like, we're going to work with you to find out, who is this character? What is this world they live in? So you give them an introduction to the world and what it's like and what the rules are governing it and how they're different from our familiar world. What are the, what is everything that a character who lives in this world would know and would think? And then on top of that, you sort of help them and you work with them. Okay, who are you and where do you come from and what's your character's background and what's your backstory and how did you get here? And then when you've got all of that figured out for all the players, now we can say, okay, here's you, here's the world, here's where you are. And now there's some session that the GM puts on, the game master puts on, to say, and here's how you all found yourself in this situation. Maybe you got kidnapped. Maybe you saw a flyer and you went to this place and this is the experience you're having. Maybe something went missing and you went to look for it. Maybe, like, whatever it is, there's some way that you all found yourself in this situation together. And that's where you start from. But you want the players to have a clear idea of who they are and who they are in relation to this world. And you can have them, like you did to me, like you could have them be in this situation where they know who they are, but they have no idea where they are or what they're doing here or what's going on around them. And in that case, they have to role play that, yeah, I'm bewildered, I'm stressed, and what do I do when I'm stressed? And how do I don't know, lash out at the world in my case. But I think that giving people an idea to sort of like get a little bit comfortable with where they'll be, what they'll be doing, who they're going to be, that's a really nice thing for them to have before they get started. And then once that's in play, it's been really satisfying to me to see in the group I'm leading, to see people come out of their shells and say things they wouldn't normally say and do things that they wouldn't normally do. I had one guy, very quiet, very meek in real life, like rarely asserts himself, and the characters all complete their first major quest, and they took down this evil guy ruling this city. They called him the Baron. And in the absence of the Baron, who's stepping up to fill the leadership void? It's the Baroness and this person who's like the head of law and justice in the town, called the Arbiter. And everyone has to go before the Arbiter. And they do that individually, and he gets in there, and the Arbiter says, and for you, everyone gets an opportunity to ask me anything they would like. What would you like to know? And he looks at me and he goes, who made you the Arbiter? And I was like, that's great. That's great. Like when the players put the GM in an awkward spot, I think that's one of the most fun things, because that's, as the GM, that's when I have to do the most thinking on my feet. But also, like, that's where I get to see, like, that's a player asserting themselves, and that's their version of having fun in a way that they don't get to have fun in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, and you know what you said with the zero session and letting them know what they're in for. There's so much of, you know, like as a GM, you know, you may have ideas of where you want to go with it, but you really have to lean into what the players want as well. Um, so like I'm playing a game with my wife Laura, my friend Hannah, and my mom. And my mom is a long time background person D&D. Like, I mean, for the past 25 years, she's delivered pizza or come by and said hi during D&D games. She never played. And then one day, like, Hannah and Laura were just like, all right, mom, get over here, sit down, start playing. And she was like, okay. Of course, she was playing a one-legged old elfling man, which she loved. She just got right into that role. And what I've seen happen is they, I had one, I like to do a thing like a skill challenge where people can figure out, like they can get bonuses to make things happen, whether they're going on an adventure or like, you know, if there's like something weird to happen that they want to happen, I'm like, okay, how are we going to do this? And so they were looking at getting into this castle because there's a guy in there that they think they want, and they had this prophetic dream that pointed them towards this city or this little town. And man, we spent 4 hours. We played until 1 a.m, which, you know, Laura does not stay up past 10:30. So we played till 1, and all it was, no combat, none at all, just all role playing all the way. And they were energized the whole time. And so, like, I wrote in my notes, I'm like, lean into the role play more with this group, because this is what they love doing, you know?
Yeah.
And you're going to end up with some combat sooner or later, because there's always bad guys places. But if that's what the group wants, then that's what you know should lean into, what you should give them. You know, I'm not saying give players everything they want. It's not complete wish fulfillment, but they're supposed to be having fun, feeling cool. And if there's something that the table is leaning to, then go with it.
Right. I agree with that completely, with one exception. And I'll say that one exception is when you're the GM and you have put a lot of work into planning an encounter or creating a place, or you know, when you put all that effort into making something, I've had a lot of instances where players will, nah, we don't want to do that, we're going to go do this other thing, and you can easily find a reason to make them have to, they don't have to do it the way you designed it, but to make them at least have to reckon with the thing that you've created. So I made this big cult that had a great treasure inside, but someone decided, like, no, like, I know about this place, it sucks, I don't want to go there. And that person was very convincing, and the party was like, well, okay, we all want that treasure and we all want to go check it out and we all want to go see what's going on, but I don't want to go there. And I was like, fine. So someone's investigating, someone's looking, and I have their animal companion get kidnapped. And that was like, no, we have to go get this animal back, and that's it. Like, we have to go have this, we can't just avoid this place.
Right.
And I feel justified doing something like that because I put a lot of time into creating this story and I wanted to make them have that story. But a lot of times I will let them go off they'll do whatever they want. And I think part of the fun with that is when you make something more open-ended, you know, you get people who are like, you know, I want to get that magic power. I heard about that guy, the Dark Prince. Let me go get that. Like, oh, you know, I like that nature stuff, but I heard bad things about that Emerald guy. Let me not check him out. I heard like, and I don't know what they're going to decide to do, but I do know that one of the fun things to do is, especially when they're in their younger stages, when they're in their early stages, is you give them NPCs that they can interact with, non-player characters to interact with, that are more powerful than they are, that are wiser than they are, but that also have their own agendas. So people can sort of make that decision, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to, you know, I had the first time I did this, I had the party decide, oh, like that must be the boss, let's fight him. And that didn't work out well for them. That didn't work out well for them, but they didn't all get killed because of, you know, because of the discretion you have as the GM, that maybe this NPC doesn't have like, oh, I'm just going to kill you all. It's going to have like, no, I'm going to show you that you're not going to win this fight until you decide that maybe listening to me is a better option than fighting me. And I think for that, that's the GM discretion that you want to use, especially with new players, in keeping them all alive. And I'll also say that GM discretion only goes so far. I looked up a story. This didn't actually happen to me, but I looked up examples of bad role playing to share with them something that they should learn. Don't do this. And then the example I found, and I use this one still, is, okay, you wake up and you find yourself in a grassy field, and in this, like off to the north in the field, you see this one circle where there's no field, there's nothing growing there, everything is barren or dead. There's a gnarled, withered tree that's fallen over and decaying. There's a couple of skeletons, and you see a rabbit. You know, it hops and it's eating the grass around the edge, and it hops into the circle and it immediately disintegrates, right? You just see it like just turn to ash and disappear. And you have a character that says like, I want to walk to the middle of the field. I want to walk to the middle of that circle. And you tell the character why they don't want to do that, and the character says, no, I want to go into the middle of the field. And you say, like, you walk towards the edge of the grass, and you feel inside you that this is a terrible idea, and you feel death right in front of you, and they're like, yeah, I want to go, and that's it. You die. Because you can't, like, the GM discretion will only go so far. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I did that to just sort of impress upon my characters. You cannot be obviously suicidal and expect to have an effective campaign. You're not going to have fun if you just decide, I'm invincible. This GM is not going to kill me no matter what I do. Because
Yeah,
some people do, they have that, I want to see how far I can push this system.
right. And you also have the people, I think when you're a new player, and you're looking to find who your character is. An example that I've played this for a lot of my players. There's a caster named Matt Koval, has a whole thing on how to be a good GM, and I love his videos. But he has some for players too, and this is the one problem I've run across at multiple tables, mainly with like pickup groups or like a group that I didn't stay with for long, is the player who says, well, I'm going to do this because that's what my character would do. And it's like, it's like the free speech argument. You're like, yes, your character can be that person, but you're making everyone else at the table unhappy. You're making me unhappy by constantly being this like splinter in our side and using the excuse, well, that's just who my character is. Well, here's the truth is, the other characters at the table, the other characters in the world, why would they be with this person if that's the way he is? And I have no problem telling someone, if you keep this up, you will not be part of the group anymore because you're killing the players' fun, and there's no reason that these characters in this world would be around you at all. You know, and using, so there's a really fine line to being like, my character is the gruff barbarian that likes to start fights. Okay, that's a character choice. But the minute that you constantly go up and kill people in taverns and everyone at the table groans, you're like, hey, like you're hurting everyone else. Like, we keep that character trait but tone it back. And I've been at player situations where that player refused to change. They were just like, no, this is just what my character is. It's like, well, those people end up living alone and nobody wants to hang out with them in real life, which is what you're doing to your character, Like, nobody wants to go into that bloodbath tavern every time they go into a tavern.
Yeah, you don't want someone who burns the tavern down. I had someone who, in the context of role playing a new player, decided that he wanted to be the ultimate like ladies man. Like that was his wish fulfillment, is he wanted to be the ultimate ladies man. And his first lady that he decided to unrelentingly hit on was like the most powerful wizardess in the kingdom. And so he goes and he is very clearly rebuffed and told in no uncertain terms like not to do this. And he persists. And so I just I just make this very small thing happen where he goes and he gives her like one more like wink, one big wink at her. And I say like, she glares at you and snaps her fingers, and roll a blah 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 saving throw. And he rolls his saving throw and he gets what he gets. And I said, okay, you wink at her, and when you go to unwink, your eye does not open again. And all the other players at the table cheered because they were sick of that character acting in that way and derailing the party with those efforts. And I think a moment like that could be like transformative for setting the tone for the type of campaign you're going to run, to just say like, look, we're not going to like, you're not going to die because you made this bad decision, but I am going to let you know that these decisions you're continuing to make are going to have consequences, especially the instant you run into someone who's more powerful than you. And in my world, at least, my players are they're far and away more powerful than the average person in that world, but they are not the most powerful thing on the planet by any stretch of the imaginations. They have to work together in often creative ways to defeat, especially when they're starting out, a modestly powered foe. And I think that's a pretty good strategy that I found effective, but I think it has to be implemented judiciously. Um, for example, like a barbarian who continues to do this, like word could spread of this bloodthirsty barbarian, and if and the next time he goes into a tavern, he could find that you're not allowed inside. Like none of you are allowed inside. We've heard rumors about this, and they've spread, and we know what you're all about, and you're not welcome here. And that's a way that without the players or the GM having to bring the hammer down and like step out of character and do this, you can say like, yeah, like the consequences of who you've chosen to be have caught up with you. And so you can have a plot device that prevents players from doing the thing that basically makes the game not fun for the players.
I think it's, and nobody wants to have to do this, but I do think it's actually good to have meetings, like just like you have the zero session that sets everything up in the beginning, which has a lot to do with this panel. But as a new player, you should also be open with your GM, and you should almost have like meetings, like non-zero sessions in the future, where everyone talks about like, well, here's where my character is going, and like this is what I'm worried about, and I one of the hard things with that is, we're all adults now. We're not sitting in our dorm playing every weekend. We'll have a month in between. So it can slip someone's mind, or an email from a GM can be like, how do you feel things are going? You might not get that. But I think it's good to actually have one of my play groups now. It's the cyberpunk play group. We hang out a lot, just not playing the game, but everyone is really invested in that game. So they will talk about the game when we're not in it, which normally doesn't happen with a lot of my game groups, where you have this downtime to talk about what you're excited about with the game. And then it really helps the game master to go, oh, like, this is really, like, I wasn't reading this at the table, but if this is what they spent 2 hours talking about when we're out hiking through the woods, this is really important. So it's almost good to have those check-in sessions to make sure that everyone's character is progressing in a certain way. But I do think that a player does need to be in touch with their GM, because I've also seen things happen where people there were problems at the table and they weren't talked about. And then when it hit big, and it was sort of overwhelming. And I think it's much better, because sometimes, as a GM, and that's the other thing is, like, sometimes, like, Laura will tell me things. She's like, oh, well, you've got it all figured out behind the screen. You know what you're doing already. And I like fling my screen around, like, no, I only have 2 lines about this guy. Everything else I'm just making up. We have so much going on behind the screen that I feel that we can miss stuff that's happening at the table. And I really didn't notice it until, like, back when we originally started doing playing Drink and Dungeon, and it was my first recorded gaming session. So, like, I had to edit it, so I had to watch myself game master, and I could tell that there was some clashes at the table. But then my old philosophy professor watched it, and old philosophy professor, meaning the one when I went to school, not the fact that he's old. I'm not being ageist here. But he said, Michael, I really like it, but I feel like that you and the other man are talking over the women too much. And I went back and watched it, and oh my gosh, like, it broke my heart to see that happen. And
yeah, I mean, sometimes you need an outside perspective to make you think about the dynamic at the table. And and part of that in general is, yeah, that is a specific way that gender dynamics often play out in life and in role-playing games. And I think it's a specific application of the general point that you want to make sure that everyone gets to play their character in the way they want to play their character. And that means, like, this person needs their voice. This person, if they assert themselves as the GM, you need to make sure that that everything else is put aside while this person gets to assert themselves. And that can happen for someone of any gender, of any age, but do be particularly mindful of it for anyone who's in general an underrepresented minority: women, people of color, non-binary people, LGBT people, LGBTQ plus people. Make sure that everyone at the table gets their say. And yeah, some people are going to be more assertive, more aggressive, more leadership, more of the decision maker. That's a dynamic that plays out. But I think you want to be very careful to make sure that everyone is getting to take the actions that they want their character to be taking, and gets their voice heard during the decision-making process.
Yeah.
How did you adjust when you received that criticism? Because I think that could be a very good lesson for anyone who's interested in being an inclusive GM.
Well, I think that the Drink and Dungeon thing was a very high stress thing anyways. One of the people at the table was not um, just wanted to play D&D and didn't want to be on camera, and this was the only way that they could play, was because I had offered this up. And so I think that by default they weren't as excited about playing. I know, I mean, I was GMing different because I was aware that there's always a camera on. And then also another big problem was the fact that it was drinking dungeon, and we would film a normal 3-hour session, and with 3 people drinking, doing shots of whiskey and stuff, it would be hard to stay on track, to understand, that 3rd hour of playing, people were off in their own world. And so like, it was sort of, we had a meeting that, didn't, I was like, we need to actually calm down on the drinking. There's people of the opinion of, well, but this is drinking dungeon, we need to drink a lot. And it's like, well, only if people who are watching it are having fun, and only if we're having fun. But that's such a weird thing, because it was on camera. It was also 2 couples, so like that in itself is its own dynamic. But other times at tables, you had to play like an HR person, be like, okay, let's talk about this. Tell me like what's happening. And sadly, often you won't get that until something's gone over, like to the bad part, and then there takes a lot more smoothing out. And so there's I wrote a note here that one of the big things that when you're playing these games, to feel comfortable and to be a new player, is to find your group. It's almost like finding your tribe of friends. You're going to find a group that works for you, and that it's like finding a TV show that you don't have to force yourself to watch. Like, it's like, oh, I have to watch this show until season 3 when it gets good. Well, no, there's just those shows that you watch and it feels natural. And you shouldn't feel bad if you're in a group and you're just like, hey, you know what? This isn't really working for me. Which is one of the other things I've seen happen, is we get a group together, everyone's so excited to play, and they're not actually getting along well at the table, but they don't know it because they just want to play. And you have to sort of review it and go, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I need to go find a different group, and the great thing is, 20 years ago, if that happened, you were probably just out of luck, because finding another group was extremely hard. Like, before I started playing in Sam Fliegel's game, the last game I played in was in 2001. And it was, someone put up a Post-it note in the local comic book shop that said, need players. And one of the guys drove from Atlanta up to be in that group. Like, that these days, it's so easy that, you can throw a D20 and hit a gaming group,
Yeah, but also finding that group where you enjoy the dynamic of the group, you enjoy the interplay, you feel like you have a good character, and you enjoy the world that the GM has built. That's a hard thing to find, because people, for the most part, they want to play with people where they get along and where they work well together, and where there is an interesting group dynamic, and where everyone is, for me, one of my favorite parts about a campaign, especially with new players, once it gets going, is when everyone starts to understand what everyone else's goals and motivations are. People are very willing to put their own characters' interests on the back burner for a little while in order to help other characters achieve their goals. And so I think, like, I was worried as a GM with new players, where it was like, wow, how are they going to feel about if a plot point or a location is of major interest to one character? And it turned out that was not a real worry. Like, at least as an adult, that was not a real worry. People were, in general, very comfortable with that idea of, you know what, we're going to go out of our way to help this person get that epic axe that they wanted, get that suit of armor, find that memento of their parents, like get revenge on what, like people are very willing to go help out with that quest. And on the at the same time, people are very unwilling to indulge, like, you know, like, oh, this character is a cowardly megalomaniac. Let's maybe not support their megalomania right now. And that's kind of interesting too, where you see like a player like, yeah, my character goes and punches this hobo in the street, and then the player is like, oh, this is a dark day for my character, like where they know what they're doing is horrible, but also like this is what my character would do.
Yeah, I think, and I sent out a, so jumping to another point I've got written down here. Did I send out a GM sheet when you did the Starborn thing with me that like explained my GMing style?
um I don't think you've sent it out, but you did send me one of those. And that was an interesting aspect too that I had never seen before. You sent me one of those to use with my players, where what you had set up was, it was like a sliding scale of 1 to 5 of like, do you want to be story driven or combat driven? Do you want to be like basically what is your style as the GM for what your idea of the campaign is, and what is your style as the players for the type of character you want and the type of campaign you want to play in. And I don't remember all of your sliding scale metrics, but I do remember having my players do that before one of our sessions, and we talked about that before we got into the session. And that was a very useful exercise on our part, because we got to have a conversation about expectations and hopes, and we were able to sort of tailor the campaign. I was able to tailor my campaign to sort of be a little more in line with what the players were looking for. But at the same time, the players said to me, like, you know, I don't think we would be as story driven. I think we would be more combat driven if it weren't for the way you're running the campaign. And we like the campaign. Like we continue to show up and be enthusiastic about it, and we like the way this is going. So that was interesting to hear as well, that yeah, this is what we have in mind, and it's different from what you have in mind, but also don't listen to us too much because we don't know what we're doing and we like what you're doing. And that was a conversation that would not have happened if you hadn't sent over that sheet. Do you wanna maybe talk a little more about it, from like for what led you to design that?
Well, I think, you know, a lot of it's, people want to go into a game. It's letting people know what they're getting into. Because one of the things I realized is after we had some things happen at a table where a group had some issues and they're pulling me aside, and I started going, some of the things that people were talking about, I was like, oh, they really don't understand like maybe my background in gaming, like because I've been gaming for a long time, but really now I've only really felt comfortable being in a character where I talk in a funny voice, or like really sort of focus on that character and talk in character for a couple, maybe 2-3 years now, where one person at the table, that's all they'd ever done was very intensive in character discussions. And so it blew their mind that when we had this issue, that like, they're like, oh, that's why you always steered us more towards tactical combat and away from the spending hours in the tavern just talking to the innkeeper. Um, and they just didn't know that about me. And I thought that the GM sheet was a really good way of letting people know. And I think that a zero session does that for new players, of letting everyone know, like, if someone's new, they're like, I'm just not really good at talking in character. And it's like, cool, we'll work with that, you know, like as long as we know. Another thing for me that works for both as a player and as a GM is I'm really good at building stuff, but I have an awful memory. So like if you tell me something at a session that happened a month ago and be like, you know, let's say with your Starborn character, Ethan, if you're like, I really want to find my home world, you know, and I got 3 other people also feeding me stuff. It's not that nugget of information you gave me is any less important than what anyone else said, but it might just, like, I might lose it. And if I'm not reminded of it, you know, like, I have so many notes, and I do character campaign notes, I do session notes, and still I'll miss stuff. And I've run into that in the past where not everybody has the same, you know, mental strengths. Like Paul, if Paul ran a game as a GM, which I've never actually had Paul run a game, I think it'd be interesting. Paul's memory is amazing. He would remember something that you did the first game that was just like a little snippet. And I'm more like a big brush sort of guy where I sort of remember where a character's going, but if I'm not reminded how important this one thing is to your character, I can forget.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that's something that I try and encourage my characters to do, especially if it gets to a larger gaming session. It's easier to keep track of who wants what when you only have 2 or 3 people at the table versus when you have like a larger number of people at the table. When you have a larger number of people at the table, I kind of remind them that it's just like in real life, that most of the people at the table, they're not going to remember what's important to you. So you have to keep reminding them. And one of the things that I've tried to do is, and this has been hard for me because I want to give them clues and I want to give them help, is sometimes they will ask me like, hey, like this thing that happened 3 gaming sessions ago where we met this person, what was his name again? What was that person's name? Like, where were they and where did that happen? And I'm like, you'll have to talk to the other characters to see if you can piece this together. And sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. And I think that's, you know, the characters have to be responsible for remembering too. And just like, you know, you said Danny forgot his, like, what the heck was his character 20 years ago. Like, yeah, people forget, like, geez, where was I 3 weeks ago when I was, you remember that happened? We met that guy with the beard. What happened with that? Yeah, I don't remember. Well, you have to, sometimes you have to deal with that incomplete knowledge. And sometimes I'll give them a little help and I'll be like, oh, roll a knowledge check to see if you remember, or have the bard play a song and see if that doesn't jog your memory and roll for that. And so we'll give them a chance and we'll let a dice roll help, and always give the characters a chance. One of the weirdest things I had happen is I always give my players a chance to do something no matter how unlikely it is. And one of them, they're up in the forest, they're up at the edge of the forest, and they see like these large tracks of something that's clearly knocked down trees and like traveled through there. And it's these large like ruts in the ground. And one of my characters decides that it must be this character that they met like a few months ago that they called Nature Man. And one of my characters just yells out like, "Oh, Nature Man, I know it's you." And I'm like, okay, well, let's see what that does. Go ahead and roll your persuasion check and I'll apply whatever minuses you need. It rolls a natural 20. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, you yell out, "Oh, Nature Man, I know it's you," and things go very silent, and you hear this rumbling, and right before you, a scroll just materializes and drops on the ground, and you pick it up and you unroll it and you read, and it's a note from Nature Man. And I had to make that all up on the fly because, one, I never would have expected that someone would have yelled that out. Two, I never expected that they'd roll a natural 20, but they did, and I gave them a chance. And they asked me after the session, they were like, what would have happened if he didn't roll a natural 20? Would Nature Man have had anything to do with these tracks in the road? And I told them, you'll never know. Like, that's because the truth is I hadn't made up the full story. I was waiting to see what the characters did, and I had some ideas of where it could go, but that's what happened. And you have to be willing to change some of your plans depending on what the players do, and also depending on what they roll. So I try to make natural ones not be like insta deaths for players. I try to give them like opportunities to recover, actions that they can take to try and like not have that worst outcome happen. But when they roll a natural 20, I'm happy to like to give them their victory moment. One thing that I will do for the first few sessions that then I'll stop doing is, for the first few sessions, especially for a new player, I will make it virtually impossible for them to die. I will give them some deus ex machina where they get knocked out, but someone sees where they can stop the bleeding, or someone sees like, or someone knows that they have this magic thing that they don't know what it does, but maybe now would be the time to use it. And, you know, I do think it's worth giving people, just like video games give you a tutorial mode at the beginning, I think it's worth giving them sort of some easy adventures where like, oh, you found these monsters, and there's 3 of them, but there's 7 of you and they're unarmed and you have your arms. So like when one of them punches you in the face and breaks your jaw, it's scary, but your life's not at risk the way it is when it's 3-on-7 and you're unarmed.
Right. Yeah, it's I think having played some D&D 5th edition now, I really feel that there's some padding at level 1 that wasn't there before, where your characters, you know, when you play 3rd edition or Sagaborn at level 1, or some of the earlier games, like you really feel frail at level 1.
Yeah. Oh, this is important. One other thing I do, everyone, you know, they have their own hit dice that they roll for hit points. I always say, if you roll a 1 or a 2, whatever your dice is, re-roll. You do not get to start out as a hero with 1 or 2 hit points, even if it's 1 or 2 plus a con bonus. Like that is too little. And this is what keeps you alive. You need to be able, basically, you need to be able for a bird to poop on your head and you're not dead. Like that
Right.
can't, you're not a hero in that world.
It's funny. I'm working on Sagaborn 1.5 now, which is getting very close. And I was thinking about, instead of rolling for hit dice, because really we roll so much in the game. And I was like, what if you just got an average amount of hit dice? Like if your hit die is 1d10, you just get 6 plus your constitution bonus. And every single person I talked to said, oh no, I believe you should roll for hit points. But then every single one of those players, I said, well, what if you roll a 1? Oh, well, that's an automatic reroll. I'm like, then you don't actually like rolling for hit points. Like, and I mean, I think we do like the idea of chance, but there does need to be, in playing in Sam's game when my character leveled up, and I'd asked that group, and every one of them said, oh no, we like rolling. And so I rolled for my level 2 hit points. I was like, oh, I got 1 hit point. Sam's like, no, re-roll. I was like, oh, I got 2 hit points. He goes, re-roll again. I was like, oh, I got 7. He's like, that's better. And I was
like, yeah, and that's one of the things that you were my first exposure to this with Sagaborn, that I like a lot, because, you know, in the current campaign we're playing, you gave us 2 options, and I picked the roll option, and I was like, you know, I didn't roll very well. But I wound up with a character that I felt was more powerful than my character should have been. And one of the things you did is, instead of rolling for your initial stats, which is like a hallmark of almost every game, you said, no, here's how many points you get to start, assign them however you like, and that's your character's stats. And people really like that aspect that I played with. Even first-time players, they like the idea of that you don't get an overpowered character, but you get a character that can have some modest power in like one or two or maybe three categories, and then they have weaknesses or ways that they're just totally average. And that's what it's like when you take any real hero's journey. I don't like it when someone comes in and on a scale of 3 to 18 or 7 to 18 or whatever you do it, that everything is like 15, 16 or higher. Like that's not a balanced character. That's an overpowered character. And so even in the campaign where I'm like, oh, I've got 2 18s and everything else is like just slightly above average, I feel that that's too powerful. And I'm like, I like the balanced character with some strengths, but they're not super strong, except if they want to be in one or two, they can. But then you have weaknesses to balance it out. And I think that's a very nice way to sort of get someone invested in, here's how I'm doing it, here's why I'm doing it, here's the choices I made, and I get to own that.
I do like, for a long time it was all about rolling the dice for your character stats, and I think that there's like there's an arc when you're a gamer. If you're in like one game, you really want your character to be a character that's in your head that you want to play. You're like, oh, I want to be this ranger that's really good at sneaking through the woods and is sort of like dashing like Robin Hood. And then once you're like on your like fourth game that you're playing, you're like, all right, so I want to be, and Danny is always the one that does this. We played one group of games. He's like, okay, I want to be a bard. And I was like, okay. He goes, but I want to be 70 years old and blind. And that like basically everyone in my life has died. And I just, I have nothing left but to go adventure and see the world without eyesight. And I was like, all right, let's do this. And so I think that, building the character that you want is cool, but then after a certain time, you could do a role character where you're like, I'm just going to roll dice and see what I end up with. But I think for a vast majority of people, when they go into a game, they know the character that they want to play. And so a point buy system gives them their ability to, I love putting forth like pick faults, pick things to be afraid of, pick a low, I hate ideas of power gaming where like, oh, well, charisma's the dump stat, so that's going to be my -2 stat. And it's like, well, don't think of it that way. Like, think of it as, like with my dark elf in Sam's game, like he just is not very charismatic. Like he's been through some bad shit. He's a little too gothy for his own good. And he rubs people the wrong way. So I'm not viewing it as a way to save points to put into something else. I'm seeing it as like, oh, well, this is an actual character choice, which is the only way you can do that really is with a point buy system, I think.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, is that's when I think role playing, when people get it, when people, especially new players, when they get it, when they're like, oh, this isn't like I want to be this at the expense of this. It's like, no, this is my identity. This is what I'm all about. This is what motivates me. This is my experience. This is who I am, and this is why I act this way. I say these dumb sounding things because my character doesn't give a even thought to what someone might think. Like, this is what's on my mind. That's why my charisma is lousy. I when the monster roars at me, I roar back at the monster, and that's why my wisdom is so terrible. And when someone like gives me the scroll and I can't read it, like I'm gonna just pretend that it says whatever I want it to say because my intelligence is garbage, because that's just who I am. My intelligence is garbage and I don't care, and I'll stab something.
And I think that this comes back to being a first character too, and it's cool because it relates with you. That in the Starborn game, that first session, your character, when you guys were kidnapped and being sold off as slaves, and then everybody else in the group was like, let's just throw these guys, land on a planet, throw them on an island and leave them. And you were like, no, we kill them. And the funny thing, is as a character choice, like you were making a choice that worked very well for your character, but two of the other three players didn't know you at all, and you were in character, and so it was funny to talk with them afterwards, and they're like, so is Ethan like this really bloodthirsty, angry man? And I was like, the furthest thing from it. But that's how his character views it. And like, and that's sometimes that's the GM's job, is to look at someone whose character going, oh, this is working really well, but we need to make sure everyone's on the same page with this, you know? And then it was, and then to see how that developed into the next adventure, where the same thing happened because the pickpockets tried to steal money from you. You one punched them out, tied them up, and everyone was like, "Oh man, is this gonna get dark this time?" Like, you know, Ethan's character's gonna do his thing, and then you're like, "Okay, I'm gonna take you out in the woods and show you how to smoke fish, so you have a trade to where you can make money and you don't have to pickpocket people." And the whole time I was getting texts from Danny saying, "This is my favorite gaming session I've ever played in, because we're role playing for 2 hours, going out and smoking fish in the woods with some pickpockets, you know?" And so part of the beginning, even experienced players, but learning new characters with those players, you have to realize the give and take. It's like having a new friend, and you're like, oh, what's this person really like, you know?
Yeah, and that's interesting because we've only had 2 sessions of this, and we are all experienced players, but we are new having a dynamic with each other and with these characters. And so I think that this is a lot like you would expect on an actual adventure too, where we are forming a dynamic as a group that adventures together to see like, oh, like I see like there are like people have different ideas of what the appropriate response is in these different situations, and they have very strong ideas because we all had our own lives before we got together. We all had our own lives, our own experiences. We're from different places, and now we come together, and we are discovering that we can work together to at least work towards whatever it is we all have as our own individual goals. Because those characters' goals, each of the characters' goals, they all have individual goals, and my character's goals, I know, are not necessarily aligned. But if we can find a way to like have things work out in a way where everything is compatible, that's great. I don't care what most of them want to do. I don't necessarily know that my character even trusts all the other characters beyond a particular point. But you know, I know that my character has their own ideas of what the world is, has their own conceptions, has their own fears, has their own things that make them comfortable or uncomfortable, and what line they're willing to walk up to before they say, okay, now I respond with non-lethal violence, and what's the line where now I respond with lethal violence. And I think that the more time we spend together, people learn where my lines are for various things, and I learn where other people's lines are for things, and so do you.
Yeah, and that game, you know, by the first session, you know, you never really know where it's going to go. And by the second session, I started to see that group coalesce, and like, where like, you know, Nigel and Chip were very invested in buying rum and becoming rum runners, and you're like, I could give two shits about this. But once you guys made it to the place to sell it, you found a way for your character to interact, and by, you know, going up to the tavern and like basically sort of like roughhousing with those rough guys, but then making them eat the stuff, the smoked fish, and drink the rum that you guys bought. And so you brought your character's fighter background, but made it work for this. And then it's like I saw the whole group sort of coalesce into this thing, and it's like, oh, okay, this is how they're gonna work as a crew, basically, you know. And you guys are already starting, even in 2 sessions in, starting to have those, you know, those bonds where you're making those friendships. You know, like, I mean, the innkeeper on that asteroid is never gonna forget you guys after the show that you all put on, you know. And that's the fun thing of being a GM, watching either new players or experienced players, that group as it starts to come together and really coalesce. you're like, oh man, this is where it's going, and it's super exciting.
Yeah, and one of the things I like is as a player character, you get to choose if you treat non-player characters like people or like objects. And it's really novel for me as a GM to be able to develop the NPCs as people and trying to get the characters to see them as people and treat them as people. Because it it makes them more reluctant to just hack and slash them, which I I'll admit I do less for the monsters. The monsters are a little more one-dimensional sometimes,
Right.
but not always. But not always, and that adds another layer of things. Because some people, like one of them, I had like they were killing a human. They were a dwarf, and they were going to kill a human, and the human is just baffled, and when the human's like knocked prone and in the vulnerable position and the dwarf raises the axe for the kill, the human looks at the dwarf and says in dwarven, why? And the dwarf kills the human anyway, and then is like, and then has like the crisis of conscience afterwards where they like reckon with what they've done. And I was surprised that the dwarf killed the humans anyway, but that's the sort of thing, you know, you give the players leeway, they make their choices, and then they live with it.
Yep. So we're coming up on 4 o'clock. So we're going to be closing down soon, but I do want to pull up. So I sent out, I put together I was very happy with this email I put together to get everyone into the, where's it at? Oh, it's in Google Drive. So I put together an email for my play group that happened last night, because once again, I was getting a bunch of people together, people that hadn't played together, and people that might not have played a lot. For example, Cindy, who's sweet Nikita in our chat, this is only her second time ever playing.
That's you, Cindy. Because I met Cindy at ElfCon a few years ago, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I sent out a question that was like, here's 3 questions that can help define your character right out the bat. And this is stolen from Sam Flegel sent out some stuff, and I distilled it down. But so number 1, is your character a hero? Do they do things out of the goodness of their heart, or do they have selfish motives? Do they want to fight for a better world, or is the world there to provide for them? Number 2, what is your immediate goal? Is it money, fame, ridding the world of evil? By the way, Spellcheck originally said riding the world of evil, which I thought it would also be a very cool character choice. And then the third one, which is what you just reminded me of, is are you merciful? You've defeated most of the goblins. Only one is left, and they're begging to be spared. They've been bandits on the road, preying on innocent travelers and even hurting some of them. What do you do? And it's like, if you answer those 3 questions, you can always reference back those questions as you're getting to know your character and go, like, how did I, and it's okay to change them, because we all change too as time goes on. But
yeah, that's the important part too, is characters evolve and you evolve.
Mm-hmm.
But please go ahead, because those are good questions. Those are definitely good questions that you want to ask for someone starting out, because you will have within a party people motivated by a lot of different things. Like one of them just wants wealth and money and power however they can obtain it, and one of them has good motives but is super corruptible, where you're like, oh, like, yeah, give me the power and we'll see what happens now. And you have other people who are like, yeah, like, I might kill everything now, but I really just want to bring peace to the world. And bringing those characters together, once they have that idea of themselves, really gives them an opportunity to see, how do we interact together, how does this flourish.
And that's all we really want to do as GMs, right? Is see them interact together and see them flourish, right?
Yeah. And also, you know, presumably as a GM, you have some plot lines that are also happening in the world. But one of them, like when I did my campaign, there was this there were a few like cities in a southern part of a continent and everyone was from the southern part of the continent. And there were a few cities where there were a few leaders, like regional leaders or local leaders, that were vying for power in various things. And it was clear that like some stuff was going down. And all of this campaign started right around the 2016 election. And after that election, all of my characters were just like, you know what? All of this stuff that's happening here, we're all going to go north. And I don't care. I don't care about anything about my hometown, about the nation, about what happens here. I want to go to the north where there aren't very many people, where there isn't this centralized civilization occurring, and people can Game of Thrones it up back there, and I don't care. And like, they've kept posted on it over the campaign, and like, yeah, they know there's a civil war, they know there's a power grab, they know what's happening. They don't care. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to go back there. No one wants to check that out. So I've got this stuff that's happening in the background, and characters are getting like little bits of information as they travel around. But yeah, but that just wasn't the thing they wanted to do. So they're off doing their own thing. And that's fine, because you can only be one place at once. And one of my favorite hero lessons of all time is that not even Superman can save everyone all the time, because he can't be everywhere at once. And my characters, they're making their choices, and the world is developing where they're not just as the same as it's developing where they are.
And that's great. It makes people feel like they're part of a living world then, you know.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope that world doesn't wind up in the Starborn world, because my world is a lot weaker than your universe.
Well, the Starborn universe is definitely where I get to throw all the craziness in, you know, where Sagaborn, the world of Euteria, is very serious. You know, Starborn, it's like, what? I'm on a pirate ship in space. It's gonna be crazy. So, all right, well, we're gonna wrap this up. Ethan, thank you so much for suggesting this panel and being on it with me.
This was a lot of fun. It's my first time paneling with you, and I'm super glad we did it. We'll do it again in person at some point.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think at Mid-South-Con, we could really fill up a room if me and you gave a gaming panel.
I think we could too. And I think that we would have hopefully we would have increased sales of Sagaborn, because I'm happy to vouch for that system any day.
Awesome. Thank you. Paul's texting me. I think he needs to get on here. So, all right.
All
Not to cut it short. Love you, Ethan. Love everyone in the chat. Thank you for coming.
Good to see you too. Thanks for the chat, questions, and comments, especially you, Cindy and Nat. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you all soon. Enjoy the rest of our DonnyCon.